Welcome to Show Hell. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So before you get too warm, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there now. Relax, take a deep breath, and let yourself unwind. The GPS had led them wrong. Rachel pressed her face against the passenger window, watching the pine trees blur past in the dying light. Are you sure this is right? The photo showed a lake. Behind the wheel, David squinted at the gravel road ahead. 3 hours of driving through increasingly desolate Florida backwoods. And now this, a narrow track that barely qualified as a road, cutting through palmetto scrub and moss-draped oaks that hadn't seen civilization in decades. The host said it was secluded, David said, though his voice carried doubt. Maybe we missed a turn. Rachel checked her phone. No signal, of course. She'd wanted to get away from everything for their anniversary weekend. But this felt less like escape and more like being swallowed whole. The headlights swept across a wooden sign, weathered and leaning. Private property. Below it, smaller letters, hunting preserve. David, I see it. He slowed the car. Maybe it's multi-use. You know, hunting in season, rentals off season. The road curved and suddenly there it was. A low-slung lodge of dark wood and stone. Windows glowing amber in the twilight. It looked nothing like the cozy cabin from the Airbnb photos, but it was shelter, and they were tired. David parked beside a stack of cordwood. The silence when he cut the engine was absolute. No traffic, no neighbors, just the whisper of wind through Spanish moss. Keys supposed to be under the planter, Rachel said, checking the messages on her phone from 3 hours ago. The last time they'd had service. They found the planter, a large ceramic pot beside the front door filled with dead geraniums. David lifted it, felt around underneath. Nothing. Maybe it fell, Rachel suggested. But even as she knelt to search the wooden porch, she felt the first flutter of unease. The door was massive, made of what looked like reclaimed barnwood with iron hardware that belonged to another century, a far cry from the cheerful yellow door in the rental photos. David tried the handle. The door swung open. Well, he said after a moment, I guess that works. The interior was pristine, too pristine. Polished hardwood floors reflected the light from overhead fixtures made of antler. Leather furniture arranged around a stone fireplace big enough to roast a pig. The walls were lined with mounted deer heads, their glass eyes catching the light. Jesus, Rachel whispered, this isn't the place. But David was already hauling in their bags. Look, we're here. It's getting dark, and we got nowhere else to go. The host probably just forgot to lock up. We'll sort it out in the morning. Rachel wanted to argue, but exhaustion weighed heavier than caution. The drive had been brutal, and the thought of another 3 hours in the car made her stomach clench. Besides, the place was immaculate. Whoever owned it clearly took care of the property. She wandered through the main room while David brought in the cooler. More hunting trophies decorated the walls. Not just deer, but wild boar with yellow tusks, a black bear rearing on its hind legs, and something that might have been a panther. The furniture was expensive, the kind of stuff you'd find in an upscale hunting lodge, catering to wealthy sportsmen. The kitchen adjoined the main room, separated by a breakfast bar made from a single slab of polished wood. Industrial-grade appliances, professional quality knives mounted on magnetic strips, a wine cooler stocked with bottles that probably cost more than her car payment. Holy crap, David called from the kitchen. Look at this. He'd opened the massive side-by-side refrigerator. The shelves were mostly empty, except for a few bottles of craft beer and some expensive-looking steaks still in butcher paper. "And check out the freezer," he said, opening the bottom drawer. The freezer was nearly full. Vacuum-sealed packages of meat labeled and dated venison mostly, but other things too. Wild turkey, something labeled wild boar chops, and in the back, a package that made Rachel's breath catch. The plastic was stained dark red, not the clean, processed look of the other packages, but messy, raw, and the label written in black marker was just 2 words: "Fresh kill." "David, I see it." His voice had gone flat. Probably just, a hunter's humor. But Rachel was backing away from the refrigerator, her skin crawling. The package was recent, yesterday's date, and there was something about the shape inside the plastic that didn't look like any game animal she'd ever seen. A sound from the back of the lodge made them both freeze. A soft thump, like something being set down carefully. "Wind," David said quickly. "Just the wind." But the lodge was solid, built to withstand hurricanes, and there was no wind tonight. The Spanish moss outside hung motionless in the still air. The sound came again. Footsteps. Rachel grabbed David's arm. "We need to leave now." "Rachel, come on. You're freaking out over nothing." "Nothing?" She gestured at the freezer. "You call that nothing?" Before David could answer, they heard a phone ring. Not the electronic trill of a cell phone, but the mechanical bell of an old landline. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the lodge. David moved toward the sound, but Rachel caught his sleeve. "Don't. What if it's the owner? Maybe they're trying to reach us, wondering where we are." The phone kept ringing. 7 rings, 8, then silence. In the quiet that followed, Rachel became aware of other details she'd missed. The smell, for instance. Not just wood polish and leather, but something underneath, something organic and sharp that made her think of the butcher shop where her grandmother used to take her as a child, and the hunting trophies. Now that she looked closer, some of them were wrong. The wild boar's tusks were too long, curved back toward the skull in a way that would have made eating impossible. The deer's antlers showed signs of having been artificially enhanced, wired and glued into impossible configurations. "David," she said slowly, "look at the bear." The black bear dominated one wall, rearing up on its hind legs in a classic hunting lodge pose. But its front paws weren't paws at all. They were hands, human hands, preserved and mounted where the bear's claw should have been. David followed her gaze. For a moment, his face went through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, denial, dawning horror. She watched him try to find a rational explanation. Watched him fail. Watched the careful compartments in his mind collapse as he understood what they were really looking at. When he spoke, his voice was different. Flat, military. "We're leaving now." But as they turned toward the door, headlights swept across the windows. A vehicle was coming up to drive, moving fast enough to throw gravel against the undercarriage. Rachel and David looked at each other, the weight of their situation settling like a stone in deep water. They were miles from anywhere, in a place they shouldn't be, with no cell service and nowhere to run. The headlights died. Car door slammed. "Back door," David whispered. But even as he said it, they heard more vehicles arriving. The sound of engines and slamming doors surrounded the lodge. Voices drifted through the walls. Male voices laughing and talking in the easy camaraderie of old friends meeting for a familiar ritual. Traffic was murder. Better be worth it this time. Not like that disaster in March. New rules, boys. Clean kills only. No mess to clean up. After Rachel's blood turned to ice water, she grabbed David's hand and pulled him toward the hallway that led deeper into the lodge, away from the main room and the voices growing louder. The hallway was lined with more trophies, but these were different. Smaller, more personal. Jewelry mounted in shadow boxes. A child's shoe, bronzed and displayed like a hunting prize. A woman's purse, expensive leather, now cracked with age, positioned behind glass like a museum piece. At the end of the hall, Rachel found a bedroom and pulled David inside. The room was spartanly furnished. A king-size bed, a dresser, a single window that looked out onto Black Forest. She moved to the window and peered through the curtains. 5 vehicles were parked in the clearing around the lodge. Expensive SUVs and pickup trucks, the kind of rides that cost more than most people made in a year. Men were unloading gear from the backs, duffel bags, rifle cases, what looked like military surplus equipment. How many? David whispered. I count 8, maybe 9. Rachel let the curtain fall. David, what the hell have we walked into? Before he could answer, the front door opened. Boots on hardwood. Voices filling the main room. Lights were on when we got here. Somebody's been through the fridge. Car out front. Looks like our rabbits are already here. Rabbits. Rachel felt sick. Gentlemen, a new voice said, and this one carried authority. Older, maybe with the kind of gravitas that came from being in charge of dangerous men. It seems we have an early start this weekend. Our guests have already made themselves at home. Laughter rippled through the group, but it wasn't the kind of laughter you heard at parties. It was the sound predators made when they caught scent of prey. Same rules as always. The authoritative voice continued. Clean kills. No evidence, no loose ends. Winner takes the pot, and we all go home with our reputations intact. What about the timeline? Another voice asked. Dawn to dawn, 24 hours. They got a head start, but they don't know the terrain. A pause, and they sure as hell don't know what they're up against. Rachel looked at David and saw her own terror reflected in his eyes. Whatever this was, whatever sick game these men played, she and David had stumbled into it by accident. They weren't supposed to be here, weren't part of whatever arrangement normally brought victims to this place. But the men outside didn't know that. To them, Rachel and David were just another couple of rabbits ready to be hunted. Motion sensors. Someone was saying I've got them placed at all the usual exit points. Cameras are live. Night vision. Full kit. Thermal imaging. The works. Remember, boys, clean kills only. The judge doesn't want another mess like last time. The judge. Rachel felt something cold crawl up her spine. These weren't just random psychopaths. They were organized, connected, the kind of people who could make problems disappear. David was moving toward the bedroom door, but Rachel caught his arm. Through the thin walls, they could hear the men settling in, unpacking equipment, discussing strategy like it was a corporate retreat. Bedroom window looks like the most likely exit. I'll take the north approach. Remember, they're amateurs, probably panicking right now. David pressed his ear to the door and then turned back to Rachel. They're splitting up, he whispered, getting ready to hunt. Rachel's mind raced. The window was their only option, but they'd heard the men discussing motion sensors, and even if they made it outside, they were in unfamiliar territory, miles from help, but no way to call for assistance. But staying wasn't an option either. She moved to the dresser and started pulling out drawers as quietly as she could. In the bottom drawer, under some folded clothes, her fingers found something unexpected, a small leather journal. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with handwriting entries dated over the past several months. The first few pages looked like hunting logs, but as she read further, her blood went cold. March 15th, couple from Miami. Male put up good fight, lasted till almost dawn. Female tried to hide in the old oak. Williams took them both with head shot. Clean, no complications. April 22nd, solo target, male, early 30s. Thought he could swim the creek. Morrison got him at the far bank. Buried the remains in the usual spot. May 18th, 2 females, friends from college. Made it interesting by separating them first. Peterson and Kane each took one. Good sport all around. The entries went on page after page documenting what could only be described as a hunting preserve for human beings. Rich men who paid to hunt the most dangerous game of all. And now she and David were next. David, she whispered, showing him the journal. His face went white as he read. When he looked up, his expression had changed. The confusion and fear were still there, but underneath was something harder, something that reminded Rachel why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. The quiet strength that had carried him through the combat tours in Afghanistan. "How many weapons did you see?" he asked quietly. "Rifles, handguns, military gear." "Numbers 8, maybe 9 of them. 2 of us." David nodded, his mind already working through tactical problems. "They expect amateurs. Scare rabbits running blind through the woods. We are scared rabbits." "No." His voice was firm. "We're not. I didn't survive 3 tours in Kandahar to get picked off by a bunch of rich psychopaths playing weekend warrior." Rachel felt a flutter of hope. David was many things: gentle, thoughtful, sometimes too trusty, but he was also a Marine, and right now she needed the Marine more than the gentle soul she'd married. "What do we do?" "First, we get out of this room without them knowing. Then we turn the tables. David, they have night vision motion sensors. They have equipment," he corrected, "but they're not soldiers. They're hunters used to stalking prey that runs away." His smile was grim. "They've never hunted prey that fights back." Outside, the voices were moving, spreading out through the lodge and the surrounding property. Rachel heard the back door open and close, the soft crackle of radio communication. David moved to the window and studied the forest beyond. "They'll expect us to run for the road or try to circle back to the car. Instead, we go deeper into the woods, find their base camp, their equipment cache." "Base camp. These guys are organized. They'll have a command post somewhere, probably equipped with all their surveillance gear. We take that out. We level the playing field." Rachel stared at him. "You want to attack them?" "I want to survive." David's voice was steady, but his eyes were hard as flint. "And right now, the best defense is a good offense." A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. The soft whisper of a footstep on carpet. Someone was moving through the lodge, checking rooms. David pressed his finger to his lips, then moved to the bedroom door. The footsteps were closer now, just outside. Rachel held her breath as the doorknob turned slowly. The door opened to reveal a man in military style, clothing carrying what looked like an assault rifle. He was older, maybe 50, with the kind of precise movements that spoke of professional training. His eyes swept the room methodically, taking in every detail. For a moment, he didn't see them. David had positioned them behind the opening door, using the furniture as concealment. But then the man stepped fully into the room, and his gaze found Rachel crouched behind the dresser. His rifle started to come up, and David moved. The Marine training took over. David's hand closed over the rifle barrel, pushing it aside as the man tried to bring it to bear. They went down together, hitting the floor hard enough to shake the furniture. The rifle went skittering across the hardwood as David got on top, his hands finding the man's throat. But the hunter was stronger than he looked and experienced in close combat. He got his knee up, drove it into David's ribs, and rolled them both over. They fought in grim silence, each knowing that noise would bring the others running. The hunter was good, trained, disciplined. But David had been fighting for his life in foreign countries for years. When the hunter reached for a knife on his belt, David caught his wrist and twisted until something snapped. The hunter's mouth opened in a silent scream, and David used the moment to get his arm around the man's throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery. It took 30 seconds for the hunter to go limp. David held the choke for another 10 seconds, then let go. The man slumped to the floor, unconscious, but breathing. "Is he?" Rachel whispered. "Alive for now." David was already stripping the man of his equipment: radio, night vision goggles, ammunition. He paused, looking at the unconscious hunter, then grabbed a lamp cord and quickly bound the man's hands and feet. But we don't have long before they miss him. The radio crackled to life. "Davis, report. What's your 20? David looked at Rachel, then keyed the microphone. "Position secure," he said in a low voice that might pass for the unconscious hunter. "No contact." "Copy that. Continue. Sweep." David clipped the radio to his belt and handed Rachel the night vision goggles. "Put these on. We're going dark." He found the rifle, a high-end AR-15 variant with tactical modifications, and checked the magazine. 30 rounds. Not much against 8 or 9 men, but better than nothing. "David," Rachel said, adjusting the unfamiliar goggles. "I can't do this. I'm not a soldier. You don't have to be a soldier. You just have to survive." He moved to the window, studying the forest beyond. "Remember what I taught you about moving quietly?" She nodded. David had insisted on teaching her basic fieldcraft when they'd started camping together, back when survival was just a game between lovers. "Good. We stick together, move slow, and think like predators instead of prey." He opened the window carefully, testing for squeaks. It moves silently on well-oiled hinges. "Ready?" Rachel wanted to say no, wanted to curl up in the corner and wait for dawn, wait for this nightmare to end. But she looked at David, really looked at him, and saw the calm competence that had carried him through war zones. If anyone could get them out of this alive, it was him. "Ready," she said. They went through the window, feet first. David first, then Rachel. The night vision goggles turned the forest into a green-tinted alien landscape, full of shadows and false movement. But they could see, which was more than their hunters would expect. David led them away from the lodge, not toward the road, but deeper into the pine woods. Behind them, the lights of the lodge grew smaller, but Rachel could still hear voices, the occasional crackle of radio communication. They moved slowly, carefully, using the techniques David had learned in the military, heel to toe, testing each step before committing their weight, avoiding branches that might snap or leaves that might rustle. It was exhausting work, requiring total concentration. but it was better than the helpless terror she'd felt in the lodge. After 20 minutes of careful movement, David held up his hand and they stopped. Through the trees ahead, Rachel could see lights, not the warm glow of the lodge, but the harsh white illumination of work lights. "Base camp," David whispered. They crept closer, staying low and using the trees for cover. The hunters had set up their command post in a small clearing, complete with folding tables covered in electronic equipment, laptops showing what looked like surveillance feeds, radio equipment, even a portable generator to power it all. And there were only 2 men guarding it. Rachel counted again to be sure. 2 guards, both armed but relaxed. They were drinking coffee from thermos bottles and talking in low voices about the hunt, confident in their technological superiority. David studied the setup for several minutes, memorizing the layout, the positions of the guards, the placement of the equipment. Then he touched Rachel's shoulder, and they withdrew deeper into the trees. "Here's what we're going to do," he whispered. "You're going to create a distraction. Nothing dramatic, just enough to draw their attention for 30 seconds. What kind of distraction? Break a branch. Make some noise about 50 yards that way." He pointed into the forest. "Make it sound like someone blundering through the woods, trying to be quiet, but failing. And while they're investigating, I take them out and destroy their equipment." David's voice was grim. "Rachel, I need you to understand something. These men were planning to hunt us for sport. They were going to kill us and add our names to their little journal. I'm not going to show them any mercy." Rachel looked into his eyes and saw a stranger. Not the gentleman she'd married, but the Marine who'd fought in places where mercy was a luxury that got people killed. "I understand," she said, and she did. This wasn't about justice or morality anymore. This was about survival. And in a survival situation, the rules were different. David checked his rifle one more time, then melted into the forest like a ghost. Rachel waited until she couldn't see him anymore, then began moving toward her assigned position. The night vision goggles made navigation easier, but they also flattened her depth perception, making every shadow potentially dangerous. When she judged she was far enough from the command post, she found a dead branch and broke it deliberately, letting it crack loudly in the still air. The effect was immediate. The radio chatter from the camp stopped, and she heard urgent whispers through the trees. She could see flashlight beams sweeping the forest. "Check it out," one of the guards said. "Probably our rabbits trying to circle back." "I've got it," the other replied. Footsteps moved through the underbrush, heading directly toward Rachel's position. She stayed frozen behind a large pine tree, trusting in David's plan and her own stillness. The guard passed within 10 feet of her hiding spot, following the sound she'd made. His flashlight beam swept back and forth, but never quite found her. And then from the direction of the command post came a sound that made her blood freeze. A short, sharp cry quickly cut off. The guard with the flashlight spun around. "Mitchell! Mitchell, you okay?" No answer from the camp. The guard was already moving back, rifle ready, when the second cry came. This one was different, a gurgling sound that spoke of terrible damage to the throat. Rachel pressed herself against the tree trunk and tried not to think about what David was doing 50 yards away. She'd known intellectually that he'd killed people in the war, but knowing and witnessing were different things entirely. The forest went quiet again. No radio chatter, no voices, just the whisper of wind through the pines. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. David's voice came through the darkness. "Rachel, it's done." She found him in the command post clearing, systematically destroying the electronic equipment. The laptops were smashed, the radio gear reduced to twisted metal and scattered components. The portable generator was silent, its fuel line cut. The two guards were nowhere to be seen. "Where?" She began. "Don't ask," David said quietly. "Just help me with this." They worked together to complete the destruction of the Hunter's technological advantage. When they were finished, the command post looked like a bomb had gone off. "Now what?" Rachel asked. David consulted the night vision scope he'd taken from one of the guards. "Now even the odds some more." According to their radio chatter, they've split into teams of 2 or 3. We take them one team at a time. "David, there are still 6 or 7 of them out there. 6 or 7 rich guys playing soldier," he corrected. "They might have good equipment, but they don't have discipline. They don't have real training, and they sure as hell don't have motivation like ours." He was right. Rachel realized the Hunters were playing a game, enjoying themselves. For David and her, this was life or death. The radio on David's belt crackled. "Base camp, do you copy?" "Base camp, respond." David smiled grimly and keyed the microphone. "Base camp, here all quiet." "Jesus, Davis, where the hell have you been? We've been trying to raise you for 20 minutes. Equipment malfunction." David replied in the same low voice he'd used before. "Just got it sorted." "Well, get your ass in gear. We got movement on the south perimeter. Looks like our rabbits are making a run for the road." "Copy that. Moving to intercept." David clipped the radio back to his belt and looked at Rachel. "South perimeter. That means they're concentrating their people in the wrong area. So we go north. We go hunting." David corrected. They moved through the forest like wolves, using the Hunter's own radio communications to track their movements. The night vision equipment gave them a crucial advantage. They could see their enemies long before being seen. The first team they encountered was positioned along what the Hunters thought was an escape route. 2 men with expensive rifles and cheaper tactics, smoking cigarettes and talking in normal voices while they waited for their prey to stumble into their ambush. David approached them from behind, moving with the silent precision he'd learned in places where noise meant death. Rachel watched from concealment as he dealt with them quickly and efficiently, using techniques she didn't want to think about too closely. When it was over, David stripped them of ammunition and destroyed their radio equipment. Their count was down to 4 or 5 remaining Hunters. The next team, more challenging. David had positioned them near what looked like another ambush point when the radio crackled with a different voice, younger, more professional. "Peterson here, moving to grid 7. No visual on targets yet." Through her night vision goggles, Rachel saw David tense. Something about the voice, or maybe the way the Hunter moved through the forest, had caught his attention. "Military," David whispered into her ear. "Real military." The Hunter called Peterson, moved like David did, efficiently, quietly, with the kind of spatial awareness that came from combat experience. When David tried to approach from behind, Peterson spun around as if he'd sensed the movement. The 2 men went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting with lethal precision in near silence. Peterson was good, maybe special forces, Rachel thought, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like David might lose. Peterson got on top, his hands finding David's throat. Rachel saw David's eyes bulge. saw him weakening, and without thinking, she grabbed a fallen branch and brought it down on Peterson's head. The impact sent Peterson rolling sideways, giving David the opening he needed. The fight ended 30 seconds later, but David was breathing hard, blood trickling from a split lip. Close, he admitted, checking his rifle for damage. Too close. They'd made noise. Not much, but enough. In the distance, Rachel heard voices calling Peterson's name. "We need to move," David said. "Now, how do you feel?" David asked as they moved to their next objective. Rachel considered the question seriously. She should feel sick, traumatized by the violence she'd witnessed. Instead, she felt oddly calm, focused. These men had planned to hunt her like an animal, to kill her for sport, and add her name to their sick tally. Whatever David was doing to them, they deserved it. "I feel like I want to go home," she said finally. "We will," David promised. "But first we finish this." The radio chatter was becoming more frantic as the hunters realized something was wrong. Men weren't checking in, equipment was malfunctioning, and their carefully planned hunt was turning into a disaster. "Can't raise the base camp. Davis isn't responding. Something's wrong. We need to regroup." But regrouping was exactly what David didn't want them to do. He led Rachel on a careful hunt through the forest, using the hunters' radio communications to stay one step ahead of them. One by one, he eliminated the remaining teams, always striking from concealment, always leaving their radio equipment destroyed. By the time the sun began to rise over the Florida pine woods, only 2 hunters remained. The leader, the one with the authoritative voice, who talked about judges and clean kills, and one other man whose radio had gone silent when they had found Peterson's body. David found the leader at the lodge, frantically trying to raise his missing men on a backup radio. The bound and gagged form of Davis, the first hunter they'd encountered, lay zip-tied in the corner of the main room, discovered too late to help his companions. The man was older, maybe 60, with the kind of silver hair and expensive clothes that spoke of serious money. He looked like he belonged on a yacht or a golf course, not in a hunting lodge surrounded by evidence of his sick hobby. "And of the line," David said, stepping out of the forest with his rifle trained on the man. The hunter spun around, his hand moving toward a pistol on his hip, but he froze when he saw David's eyes. "You," the hunter said, and his voice held a note of genuine surprise. "You're supposed to be prey." "Plans change," David replied. Rachel emerged from the tree-in, still wearing the night vision goggles pushed up on her forehead. She looked like a warrior returning from battle, and maybe that's what she was. "Who are you people?" the hunter demanded. "This isn't how it works. You don't know the rules." "We learned them fast enough," David said. "Clean kills, no evidence, no loose ends. Isn't that right?" The hunter's face went pale as he realized what David was suggesting. "Look, we can work something out," the man said quickly. "The money, I can pay you more than you've ever seen. Like you paid the couples from Miami, the college girls." Rachel's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. How much did they get paid? The hunter looked between them, perhaps finally understanding that he was no longer the predator in this situation. "You can't just kill me," he said desperately. "I'm a federal judge. People will look for me." "A federal judge," David repeated. "That's even better. Think how many lives we'll save." The hunter opened his mouth to say something else, but David's rifle barked once, and the man crumpled to the porch of his sick playground. Rachel stared at the body for a long moment, then looked at David. "Is it over?" "It's over," he confirmed. They spent the next hour going through the lodge systematically, gathering evidence of the hunting preserve's activities. The journal Rachel had found was just the tip of the iceberg. There were photographs, financial records, computer hard drives, and memory cards containing video footage of previous hunts. "We have to take this to the FBI," Rachel said, holding up a folder marked guest registry that contained names, photos, and what looked like payment records. "David, look at this. There are dozens of victims, families who never knew what happened to their loved ones." David was copying files from a laptop onto a portable drive they'd found. "Do you recognize any of these faces?" He showed her a photograph of the federal judge shaking hands with men and expensive suits. Behind them, mounted on the wall like trophies, were driver's licenses. Rachel looked closer. One of the men looked familiar. She'd seen him on the news, talking about judicial reform. Another wore what looked like a sheriff's department uniform. "They are the police, Rachel," David said quietly, ejecting the memory cards from the several cameras. "Look at the guest list. Federal judges, state prosecutors, county sheriffs. How deep do you think this goes? How many investigations would get buried before they even started?" Rachel stared at the evidence in her hands. Proof of dozens of murders, of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement and the justice system. The weight of it made her feel sick. "So what do we do?" she asked. "Just let them get away with it." David was already gathering the most damning evidence. The photographs, the financial records, the hard drives, and memory cards. "We make sure this never happens again, but we do it our way. And the evidence, we keep digital copies, insurance, but the original crime scene burns." Instead, they loaded the evidence into their car along with anything valuable they could carry. The hunting preserve had been financed by wealthy men who could afford to lose a few hundred. Before they left, David used gasoline from the hunters' vehicles to douse the lodge. The fire would destroy any evidence they'd missed, and with any luck, it would look like the work of the missing hunters, men who'd gotten careless and paid the price. They drove out of the forest as the lodge burned behind them, the smoke visible for miles in the clear morning air. "Where do we go now?" Rachel asked. "Home," David said simply. "We go home and try to forget this ever happened." But Rachel knew they'd never really forget. The memory of those nights would stay with them forever. The fear, the violence, the terrible clarity that came with fighting for their lives. Some experiences changed you, marked you in ways that couldn't be undone. They'd gone into the woods as ordinary people on a weekend getaway. They were coming out as something else entirely, survivors. And perhaps that was the most frightening thing of all. Not what they'd endured, but what they'd become in the process of enduring it. The line between civilization and savagery was thinner than most people wanted to believe. Sometimes it took a weekend in hell to learn that lesson. Rachel settled back in the passenger seat and watched the Florida countryside roll past. Somewhere behind them, the hunting lodge was burning, taking its secrets to ash and memory. She reached over and took David's hand, feeling the calluses on his fingers, the new scars from their fight for survival. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," he replied, and his voice was steady. Despite everything they'd been through, they drove toward home, toward their ordinary lives, carrying extraordinary secrets. The GPS worked perfectly now, guiding them back to the world of traffic lights and coffee shops and normal people who would never understand what they'd seen in the Florida woods. Behind them, the smoke continued to rise, a black column against the perfect blue sky, evidence of a game that had finally been won by the prey. The following story: the knife felt good in my hand, balance precise, the kind of tool that could solve problems if you knew how to use it properly. I'd been using it to julienne carrots for my signature Vietnamese fusion tacos, but now I was thinking about other applications, other uses for sharp things when people backed you into corners with no way out. Let me back up. Let me tell you how a girl from Akron, Ohio, went from flipping burgers at Wendy's to running the most successful food truck in downtown Cleveland, and how that success became the thing that might literally kill me, because success, I've learned, is just another word for having something other people want to take away. My name is Veronica Costellos, though everyone calls me V, and 3 months ago, I thought I was living the American dream. Now, I know the American dream is actually a nightmare dressed up in food porn and small business loans. And the monsters under the bed are real. They just wear better suits than you'd expect. It started with desperation, which is where all the best and worst decisions begin. I'd been working double shifts at a diner on East 4th Street, watching hipsters Instagram their overpriced avocado toast while I scraped by on tips and the occasional free meal that management pretended not to notice me taking. 28 years old, culinary degree from a community college I was still paying for, living in a studio apartment that smelled like someone else's sadness. The kind of life that looks pathetic from the outside and feels even worse from the inside. Then Rico disappeared. Rico was my line cook, my friend, and the only person who understood that my Vietnamese grandmother's recipes could transform ordinary street food into something transcendent. We'd been planning to start our own place. Nothing fancy, just a food truck where we could serve real food to real people without some corporate chain breathing down our necks about portion control and profit margins. One Tuesday in February, Rico didn't show up for work, didn't call, didn't text, didn't exist anymore as far as the world was concerned. His landlord said he'd cleared out his apartment in the middle of the night or left 3 months' rent on the kitchen counter in cash and vanished like smoke. The police weren't interested in a missing person case involving a guy with a record for possession and a tendency to disappear when life got complicated. But I knew Rico. He wouldn't just leave. Not when we were so close to making our dream happen. Something had happened to him. Something that made him run, or made him unable to run ever again. The not knowing was eating me alive. A slow acid burn in my chest that got worse every day. That's when the envelope appeared. I found it slipped under my apartment door on a Thursday morning, my name written across the front in careful block letters. Inside, a cashier's check for $50,000 and a business card with nothing but a phone number, no signature, no explanation, just money, and an invitation to ask questions I probably didn't want answered. I stared at that check for an hour, turning it over in my hands like it might reveal its secrets through texture alone. $50,000. Enough to buy a used food truck, get the permits, stock inventory, cover operating expenses for the first few months. Enough to make the dream real, even without Rico. I should have torn it up, should have thrown it away, and kept scraping by on diner wages and illusions of grandeur. But poverty has a way of eroding your moral boundaries. And I'd been poor for so long that I could feel myself disappearing a little more each day. The check was a lifeline, even if I couldn't see what was attached to the other end. I called the number. You found the envelope. The voice was male, middle-aged, with the kind of careful diction that suggested either education or practice at hiding regional accents. I assume you're interested in our proposal. What proposal? You just send me money and a phone number. The money is an investment in your future. Miss Castellanos, your culinary talents are wasted in that diner. We'd like to help you realize your potential. The way he said my name made my skin crawl like he'd been practicing it. Who's we? What do you want in return? Simple terms. Use the money to start your food truck, operate your business. Send us 20% of your gross receipts every week, cash only, to a location we'll provide. No questions, no contact, no complications. That's it. 20%. That's it. Consider us silent partners in your success. I should have asked more questions. Should have demanded to know who he was, why he was interested in me, what happened to Rico. But the check in my hand felt like salvation, and I'd been drowning for so long that I wasn't inclined to examine the life preserver too closely. How do I know this is legitimate? A pause. Then you don't. But you'll cash the check anyway, because you're desperate. And desperate people don't have the luxury of suspicious minds. We'll be in touch, with details. The line went dead. He was right, of course. I cashed the check the next morning, and it cleared without incident. Within 2 weeks, I bought a renovated Airstream trailer, painted it bright yellow with Ban Boulevard and bold red letters across the side. Within a month, I was serving Vietnamese fusion to downtown office workers, and the line stretched around the block. The food was extraordinary. I knew it was. Could taste the alchemy that happened when my grandmother's recipes met American ingredients in my own desperate creativity. The banh mi were perfect symphonies of flavor and texture, the pho rich enough to make people weep, the fusion tacos that married Vietnamese herbs with local Ohio produce unlike anything Cleveland had ever tasted. But it wasn't just the food that made us successful. I had a gift for reading people, for understanding exactly what they needed and serving it up with a smile and just enough attitude to make them feel like they discovered something special. Business people loved the quick service and complex flavors. Food bloggers loved the authenticity mixed with innovation. Social media loved the photogenic plating, and my carefully curated origin story about the granddaughter of Vietnamese immigrants making it in America through hard work and delicious food. The regular customers who'd made us profitable were mostly a joy to serve. Mrs. Patterson from the insurance office who ordered the same vermicelli bowl every Tuesday and always asked about my grandmother. Jake from the construction crew who'd started bringing his whole team for lunch and tipped in cash because he knew how hard small business owners worked. Almost all of them brought warmth to my days except for one man who'd started showing up in week 4. He claimed to be a freelance food writer working on a piece about Cleveland's emerging food scene, but something about him felt off. He asked more questions about my suppliers and my business model than my recipes. His eyes always a little too sharp, a little too focused on details that had nothing to do with the food. When I served him his usual pork banh mi, always the same order, always at exactly 12:30. I caught him watching me with the intensity of someone taking inventory rather than enjoying lunch. Within 6 weeks, we were the most talked about food truck in Cleveland. Within 8 weeks, we were booking private events and catering gigs. Within 10 weeks, I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed possible. And every Thursday, I dutifully prepared an envelope with 20% of the gross receipts and dropped it at the designated location. A different spot each week, always a public place where cash could change hands without attracting attention. I never saw who picked up the money. I never asked questions. I never tried to trace the phone number or investigate my mysterious benefactor. I told myself this was business, just unusual business. And as long as the arrangement worked for everyone involved, there was no reason to complicate things by being curious. Then we started making too much money. The first hint of trouble came during week 12 when the weekly drop location was a bench outside the West Side Market. I left the envelope as instructed, walked away, and turned back 5 minutes later to see a woman in a gray coat examining the contents with the focused attention of an accountant. She looked up, caught me watching, and for just a moment, our eyes met across the crowded market square. Her expression was not pleased. The phone call came that night. "Miss Castellanos, we need to talk about your recent performance." Same voice, but the careful politeness had developed an edge. "My performance business is great. I've been sending you exactly 20%, just like we agreed. Your numbers don't match our projections." "What projections? You never told me about any projections." "The projections we made when we decided to invest in your operation. Based on average food truck revenue in the Cleveland market, seasonal fluctuations, typical growth patterns for new businesses, your success has been anomalous." There was something in the way he said anomalous that made me think of medical terminology of things that grew where they shouldn't and had to be cut out before they spread. "I'm sorry I'm making too much money for you." "You're making too much money. Period. When a business outperforms expectations by this margin, it attracts attention. Attention from health inspectors, from tax authorities, from people who ask inconvenient questions about rapid success stories. We prefer our investments to maintain a lower profile. So what are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting you scale back operations, reduce hours, simplify the menu, maybe take some time off for personal reasons. Bring your revenue numbers back in line with realistic expectations for a business of your size and experience level." I felt something cold settling in my stomach. "And if I don't want to scale back, then we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements." The line went dead again, but this time the silence felt threatening rather than mysterious. I spent the next week in a paranoid haze, jumping at every unexpected sound, analyzing every customer's face for signs of surveillance or threat. The joy I'd found in cooking began to curdle into anxiety. Every perfect bangi felt like evidence of my own success, and success had apparently become a liability. But I couldn't bring myself to sabotage the business I'd built. These weren't just transactions. They were connections, relationships, a community of people who trusted me to feed them well. Mrs. Patterson from the insurance office, who ordered the same vermicelli bowl every Tuesday and always asked about my grandmother. Jake from the construction crew, who'd started bringing his whole team for lunch and tipped in cash because he knew how hard small business owners worked. The food bloggers who'd made us famous. The social media influencers who'd made us trendy. The regular customers who'd made us profitable. How do you deliberately fail the people who believe in you? How do you poison something you created with your own hands and heart? But even as I wrestled with these questions, part of me kept thinking about that strange food writer who never seemed to publish anything, who asked uncomfortable questions and watched me with predatory attention. There was something calculating about the way he studied my operation. something that made my skin crawl, even when he was ordering his usual pork banh mi with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. I didn't scale back. I couldn't. Instead, I decided it was time to meet a mysterious partner face to face and negotiate new terms that would work for everyone. I was a businesswoman now, after all. Well, surely we could reach some kind of reasonable accommodation. I called the number on Thursday morning, right before the lunch rush. I want to meet. That's not how this works, Miss Castellana. It's how it's going to work now. I'm not some desperate kid anymore. This is my business, and I deserve to know who I'm working with. A long pause. You don't want to know who you're working with. Yes, I do. Name the place and time where I stopped sending money and start asking questions about where that $50,000 really came from. Another pause longer this time. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Friday night, 11 p.m. The parking lot behind Prosperity Social Club on Professor Avenue. Come alone, obviously. And Miss Castellaus, don't mistake this conversation for the beginning of a negotiation. This is us being polite enough to explain why negotiation isn't possible. The line went dead. Friday night came with a cold October rain that turned the parking lot behind Prosperity Social Club into a maze of puddles and shadows. I arrived at 10:50, parked under a broken street light, and waited with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. At exactly 11 p.m., a black sedan pulled up next to my truck. The driver stayed behind the wheel while a woman got out of the passenger side. The same woman I'd seen examining my envelope at the West Side Market. Though up close she looked older and more dangerous than I'd initially realized. Mid-4s, average height, the kind of unremarkable appearance that was probably a professional asset. She wore dark jeans, a leather jacket, and the expression of someone who'd had this conversation before and knew exactly how it was going to end. "Veronica Castellanos," she said, approaching my truck with measured steps. "You want to meet? Here I am. You're my investor." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm someone who cleans up messes when investments don't perform as expected. My name is Janet Reeves, and I work for people who prefer not to work directly with the public. What kind of people? The kind who have a lot of money that needs to look like it came from legitimate sources. The kind who use food trucks, laundromats, car washes, and other small cash businesses to transform dirty money into clean tax returns. The kind who don't appreciate it when their carefully planned operations start generating attention because some amateur gets lucky and makes too much real money. The pieces clicked into place with the sick logic of a puzzle you'd never wanted to solve. Money laundering. I'd been running a front without knowing it, a successful front, which meant the fake books my silent partners were keeping matched the real revenue I was generating. In their ledgers, Banh Mi Boulevard was supposed to be a modestly profitable small business that processed a predetermined amount of illicit cash each week. In reality, we were a phenomenon that was making legitimate money on top of the dirty money, which meant their numbers were wrong, and someone somewhere was going to notice the discrepancy. "How many food trucks do you run?" I asked. 17 in Cleveland, 8 in Columbus, 12 in Cincinnati, all carefully calibrated to generate exactly the right amount of income to justify exactly the right amount of cash transactions, all run by people who are either too stupid to ask questions or too smart to survive asking them. And Rico, did he ask questions? Janet's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Rico got greedy, started skimming from his drops, thought we wouldn't notice a few hundred here and there. We gave him a choice: disappear voluntarily or be disappeared permanently. He chose wisely. So he's alive as far as I know, probably running a taco stand in Phoenix or Portland under a different name. Hopefully smart enough to keep his mouth shut and his hands out of other people's money. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a new kind of fear. What choice are you giving me? Same choice we gave Rico, with modifications appropriate to your situation. Option 1. You scale back operations immediately and permanently. We're talking 50% reduction in hours, simplified menu, reduced quality. Whatever it takes to bring your numbers back in line with our projections. You become the kind of food truck owner you were supposed to be, someone who makes enough money to survive, but not enough to thrive. And option 2 is more complicated. See, your success has created a problem that goes beyond simple revenue management. You've built a brand, a reputation, a following. People expect Banh Mi Boulevard to be extraordinary. Now, if you suddenly start serving mediocre food, they'll notice. They'll ask questions. They'll investigate. Janet pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photos, screenshots of social media posts, food blog reviews, local news articles about Cleveland's hottest food truck. You've made yourself visible, Veronica. Visibility is the enemy of our business model. So what are you suggesting? We're suggesting you help us solve the visibility problem by creating a different kind of story. A tragedy that explains why Banh Mi Boulevard suddenly isn't what it used to be. Something that generates sympathy instead of suspicion. My hands were shaking now, and I pressed on them against my thighs to keep Janet from noticing. What kind of tragedy? The kind that involves someone close to the operation disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Someone whose absence would be devastating enough to explain a dramatic decline in food quality and business performance. Someone whose disappearance would be investigated briefly, mourned publicly, and then forgotten as Cleveland moves on to the next hot food trend. The parking lot suddenly felt much colder. You want me to kill someone? We want you to solve a business problem using the resources at your disposal. What that solution looks like is up to you, but it needs to be permanent. It needs to be believable, and it needs to happen within the next 2 weeks. And if I refuse, then you become the tragedy instead of the author of it. And we find someone else to run a nice, quiet, profitable food truck that serves adequate Vietnamese food to people who don't know any better. Janet walked back toward the sedan, then turned around one last time. Think about it over the weekend, Veronica, but don't think too long. We got 17 other trucks to manage, and we can't let one ambitious cook derail the entire operation. The sedan pulled away, leaving me alone in the parking lot with the rain and the terrible arithmetic of survival. Make someone else disappear or disappear myself. Frame someone for a crime or become the victim of one. Destroy another person's life or watch mine be destroyed instead. I drove home in a daze, my mind cycling through options that all led to the same dark conclusion. There was no way out of this that didn't involve someone getting hurt. The only question was whether that someone would be me or someone I chose to sacrifice. By Saturday morning, I'd made my decision. By Sunday afternoon, I'd made my plan. By Monday, I was ready to become the kind of person who could do what needed to be done. The knife still felt good in my hand as I prepped vegetables for the lunch rush. And I found myself thinking about precision, about cutting through problems with the right tool applied at the right angle, with the right amount of pressure. I thought about Rico somewhere in Phoenix or Portland, probably wondering if he'd made the right choice. I thought about Janet Reeves and her careful explanations, and her 17 food trucks full of people who didn't know they were washing money for criminals. Mostly, I thought about the customer who'd been coming to my truck every day for the past month. That self-proclaimed food writer who had been making me uneasy since week 4. Always ordering the same thing. Always paying in cash. Always asking too many questions about my suppliers and my background and my business model. The one who claimed to be a food blogger but never took pictures of his meals. Who said he was writing an article about Cleveland's food scene but never seemed to publish anything. Who looked at me with the focused attention of someone gathering information rather than simply enjoying lunch. The one whose disappearance would be a morning briefly, and then forgotten because food bloggers come and go, and nobody really keeps track of freelance writers who claim to be working on articles that never seem to get published. The one who'd be coming to my truck in exactly 20 minutes because he always came at exactly 12:30 and always ordered the pork bun me with extra pickled vegetables. I finished julienning the carrots and moved on to prep work. They required a bigger knife, a sharper edge, and a steadier hand. Some problems could only be solved by cutting through them completely, and I'd learned that success meant being willing to do whatever it took to protect what you'd built. Even if what you'd built was rotten from the foundation up, even if protecting it meant becoming something you'd never planned to become. The lunch rush was about to begin, and I had a customer to serve one last time. And that brings us to the end of another night filled with tales from the shadows. To anyone who stuck with me until the very end, thank you so much for sharing this journey into the unknown. Your company makes these dark stories feel a little less lonely, and I'm truly grateful you chose to spend your evening here with me. I hope these tales have given you exactly what you came for, that delicious blend of fear and fascination. There's something wonderfully eerie about how we can all gather in the darkness, connected by our love of a good scare. And I genuinely hope tonight's stories resonated with you as much as they did with me. I'll be back tomorrow night with more mysteries and chills waiting to unfold. So, I hope you'll join me again. Until then, sleep well, dream peacefully, and don't let tonight's stories follow you into your dreams. Though, if they do, just remember they're only stories after all. Sweet dreams, my friend. See you tomorrow night.